before we had the election of Wilders, the Dutch government was really completely off the rails. They were as radical as Justin Trudeau, but things have changed, and months-long farmers' protests have, I think, somewhat moved the needle with regard to these climate policies that were being adopted by the Dutch government and were sort of coming down from the EU and the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. Give us an update about this.
Yeah, this has been going on for a while. Now, first of all, net zero, just so we understand, you could say it's the intentional collapse or severe rationing of our energy, food supply, and transportation freedom of movement. What's happening in Europe, so we understand the background, in 2015, they had the United Nations Paris Climate Agreement, which essentially set forth this concept of limiting the Earth's temperature to 1.5 degrees and the whole net zero agenda. And it became ingrained. All these countries pledged, which then became part of their court system. And actually, that's one of the reasons the Netherlands farmers came to the courts. It's not like the Netherlands legislature voted to start restricting farms. But what happened was Sri Lanka was before the Netherlands, and they actually went full organic. They had one of the highest ESG scores in the country. The World Economic Forum was touting their agricultural, climate-friendly reforms. And of course, the entire country's food supply collapsed when they did this. And the peasants overran the presidential palace and went after, and even swam in the swimming pool, and the leader was exiled. What this agenda demands in terms of agriculture, first of all, just overall, it's the net zero means the intentional either collapse or severe restriction of energy, food, transportation, freedom of movement. In the case of food, they're looking for severe rationing of food. They're going after nitrogen-based fertilizer, which they say creates nitrous oxide, which is a warming agent. So that means cutting back on fertilizer means cutting back on high-yield agriculture, which in short means cutting back on plentiful food, which has been part of the green revolution that's fed billions throughout the world, particularly since the 1960s, people like Norman Borlaug. The other thing that net zero demands is methane restrictions. And methane restrictions mean what? Animal agriculture, the farting and belching of cows, sheep, pigs, any kind of animal agriculture. That's also in the crosshairs. And of course, you have Bill Gates and Richard Branson investing in the lab-grown meat grown in steel vats in a petri dish, and then eventually printed on a 3D printer, the most processed meat. It is technically meat because it's genetically derived from the stem cells from fetal blood, but it grows amorphously in a steel vat. There's no eyes, no brain, the bone structure or bone structure. And then they have to, of course, add coloring and texture. I mean, it looks like that pink slime you see in the videos of McDonald's chicken nuggets. But that's what they're doing. They're softening us up by making food rationing to accept the bugs and the lab-grown meat. So in the case of the Netherlands, they were facing up to 10,000 family-run small and medium farms being decimated by the, quote, climate compliance costs of net zero. And the farmers didn't take it. They brought the tractors out. They blocked highways. They went to the state capital, the country's capital, and they went beyond that. They formed their own political party, the BBB, and they are part of a governing coalition now in the Netherlands stopping this. This has inspired, and this is the success story of the year of the climate movement right now. Farmers in Romania, Poland, Germany, France, farmers heading to the gates of the EU headquarters in Brussels in tractors and bullhorns with a public support behind them. And they have literally brought the EU to its knees. They're now announcing that they are going to back away from the 30% cuts in agriculture and emissions that they were previously demanding. This is a success story we should be celebrating, and it shows you that not complying, not going along, not being quiet, not saying we're all in this together to fight climate change, instead saying, hell no, we're not going to take it. The EU is blinking, they're backing off, and let's hope this farmers' revolt holds and we can actually have the farmers lead a revolt against the energy restrictions and against the gas-powered car bans and against the entire rest of this loony climate debate, which, by the way, Sheila, has devolved in the last few weeks to levels I've never seen. Peer-reviewed study in December about human breath contributing to global warming. Women heat the earth more than men with their breath. And now you have the Washington Post here in Washington, D.C., telling us that we need to recycle human hair. When you see floor sweepings at the barbershop or hair salon, you need to be thinking, save that hair. If it ends up in a landfill, it'll be incinerated and cause emissions. We need to make clothing out of it, which we can then go past that limit of the C40s of 3 new items of clothing per person per year. I have it on official UN guidance that they will allow us to have more than 3 items of clothing if we have from things like human hair made clothes.
Gross. Like, there's just so much of the environment movement that is disgusting, from what they want me to eat to what they want me to do with my toenail clippings. Like, it is just so gross. And I'm a farmer, but more than being a farmer, I'm also a conservationist. I'm the 6th generation on the land where I live. I have a real tough time taking advice from people who don't ever get off the pavement telling me that they know what's best for my land. And I think one part that's missing in all of this, and we see this with, it's unrelated, but it's also part of the same thing that progressives do. They go after the big fish because the little fish will fall in line. They're doing this with immigration, with Texas. That's why they went after the Netherlands, is because they really are the agricultural breadbasket of Europe. And if you can flip the Netherlands on board with your wacky climate agenda, then everybody else will fall in line. But thankfully for those farmers, they didn't, and they've inspired the other countries of the EU.
They really and truly have, and they need major kudos for what they've done. You have such an assault. And here in the United States, Bill Gates, as according to NBC News, became America's #1 farmland owner. Bill Gates, we're already seeing now the FDA has approved lab-grown meat. It pays to have a lot of money and a lot of connections in government. You have Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, very close behind, may have even surpassed Bill Gates now in buying up farmland. You have China very close in that race, buying up U.S. farmland and other farmland. Of course, they're buying up all of Africa. This is a war against our food supply. In the United States, we have China buying up sausage factories and pork factories, and you have all of these restrictions now on our food supply because of net zero. Canada is spread there, all these net zero. Australia, the Australian biologist Jennifer Moriarty said it's decimating Australian farmers. Of course, it's spread all over Europe. John Kerry announced in summer 2023 that the net zero commitments were coming to the United States, that U.S. farmers were no longer exempt from this. So I'm hoping to see U.S. farmers on tractors heading to Washington, D.C. for this same issue. But what they're doing, and this was a byproduct of COVID, which is what they loved, all of the supply chain issues, the lockdowns and the stay-at-home orders, we had meat shortages. And even today, you go order a steak in a restaurant, it's probably 2 to 3 times what it was pre-COVID here. This is a feature, not a bug of the system. They want to make everything expensive and ration it. They want us to eat more processed food. They want us to start opening up to eating insects. In Australia, public schools, and in some in Europe, they started this. They give kids insect-based snacks. Now they're based on crickets, but they're not eating what looks like crickets. They're eating cricket powder milled to a fine, greasy, crispy thing with lots of salt on it. And the kids are told to, quote, go home and pester their parents that they ate bugs and there's nothing wrong with it. That's a psyop on kids. It's all part of the net zero agenda against modern agriculture and farming. They want this because they want to control the food supply. When you get rid of all these small farmers, what's going to happen to them? Either they become strip malls, or you're going to have the big conglomerates, equity asset firms, the big corporate coming in and taking over. It's the same thing that's happening. We had this happen with U.S. fracking during lockdowns with a huge drop in demand. We had a lot of smaller companies and landowners were leasing, and then you have instantly the big guys come in. This is why ExxonMobil has always supported carbon taxes, has always supported UN Paris climate agreements with the UN, because they can afford the climate compliance costs, and they have the best lawyers and lobbyists. And so this is a way, kind of like the lockdown, COVID lockdown, to crush all the small businesses and the mom and pop and the small operators and consolidate to a huge corporate conglomerate that's easy to control, and you can have the great corporate government collusion. It's happening in transportation. It's happening in food. Of course, it's happening in energy.